Back in 1995, Acclaim published a game called Spider-Man. It's just called Spider-Man, but it has been talked about as the Spider-Man animated series game. They published it for the Super Nintendo, but the version that I looked at was for the Sega Genesis, and I chose that one because the Spider-Man that I saw in images and in some of the videos in the Genesis version looked a little less squat than the Super Nintendo version of Spider-Man, which just looks strange. It looks like everybody just squished everything. So I like the visual kind of quality of Spider-Man himself in the Sega Genesis version. I've since come to find out the Super Nintendo game is completely different than the Sega Genesis game, so that means I have to go and hunt that one down, and I'll review that for you later. But I gotta tell you, the Sega Genesis version of this game, it's okay. It's not bad. I had a pretty good time swinging around and punching bad guys. Some of them have little knives on them, and they have like Doc Ock kind of feet. They come slicing at you. I was beating up this henchman that looked exactly like Master Chief at one point with an energy sword, and it was freaking me out because this, of course, took place years before we saw anything from Halo, and it was just like, what the hell? And then I went down the rabbit hole. Did Bungie look at this game and say, that's a good look for our character? I don't know what happened, but I was beating up that guy. I was beating up big goons with machine guns. I was beating up little tiny toy things that were shooting bombs at me. Every once in a while, some posters would roll up and hands would come out of it. What I'm telling you is that there's a lot of diversity in the bad guys that you're going to fight, and that's a big part of the charm in this game. There's also a tremendous amount of Spider-Man villains popping into frame here. You're going up against Shocker. You've got Green Goblin flying in. You beat up Doc Ock, you beat up Rhino. They're all over the damn place, and you don't know when they're going to pop up, which is kind of cool. They all escape from Ravencroft prison at the beginning of the game, and then that's it for story. They all escape, and then Spider-Man has to go and hunt them down, and they pop up in all kinds of places, like in science labs, or on city streets, or in construction zones. The level design's actually pretty disparate from level to level and pretty artistically done, although there is confusion about exactly what nook and cranny you can get into. And the way that you leave a level is kind of really not elegant either. Just an exit sign just pops up out of nowhere, and then you walk into it and it's like, level complete! You don't quite know where you're going sometimes because this is a game that plays with different planes, so you have to pop into the background sometimes and pop forward, and there's a lot of really obscure obstacles that pop up in front of you, and you don't quite know why you can't go there. It takes a while before you start to understand the mechanics and sort of what the design philosophy was with the game. And of course, there's some sloppy collision detection. Your web doesn't stick to the ceilings all the time, and that can be kind of a pain in the ass because you're falling to your doom and you want to swing to the next thing, but you don't always make that. I kept falling into this pit, this electric pit, and it kept zapping me, and I just couldn't jump out of it. There's definitely some jumping issues and some collision detection issues. You don't always know when you're making contact with the punches. I found that jumping and kicking was actually very effective. You can also throw bombs. I don't know if Spider-Man ever threw bombs as part of his arsenal, but you can throw bombs at bad guys and electric bombs at bad guys. There's also Fantastic Four cameos and lots of other little collectibles that you get, including extra lives and invincibility that turns Spider-Man all blue. In spite of problems and in spite of the lack of finesse, and it felt a little bit kind of thrown together, didn't feel like this was lovingly crafted. It's not an Adventures of Batman and Robin, that's for sure. It's not even as good as the Sega-published Spider-Man game, but there's still charm in this game, and you do feel like Spider-Man when you're climbing up the walls and on the ceiling and swinging and, web-zipping different, like you web-zip Scorpion's tail because he keeps zapping you, and then you can go punch him. There's some really cool little bits in here. So, it charmed me. I'm going to give Spider-Man, and I'm going to put this in quotes, the animated series from 1995, published by Acclaim for the Genesis. It's a long title. A 7 out of 10.